Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Charlene Aaron.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. Russian President Vladimir Putin is lashing out against criticism in the wake of the downing of the Malaysian airliner over eastern Ukraine. New evidence puts the blame on Russian-backed separatists in Ukraine. Those rebels are also blocking recovery efforts and taking crucial evidence, including the plane's black boxes. Dale Hurd has this story.
4 days after the tragedy, the crash site and all the evidence still remain unexamined. Around 250 bodies have been recovered, most moved to these refrigerated rail cars after lying out in the sun for days. World outrage is growing.
I want to arrange their funeral. I can't. I don't know where they are. I want my children back.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is on the defensive, accusing others of exploiting the crash for so-called mercenary objectives. He's also still blaming Ukraine authorities for reigniting the fighting with pro-Russian rebels. Secretary of State John Kerry was having none of that.
Russia has armed the separatists. Russia has supported the separatists. Russia has trained the separatists. Russia continues to refuse to call publicly for the separatists to engage in behavior that would lend itself to a resolution of this issue.
The U.S. says it tracked a missile from rebel territory hitting the plane. And there are audio intercepts released by the Ukraine government showing rebel leaders discussing the shootdown. The U.S. also saw a Russian convoy carrying military equipment entering Ukraine last week, and 3 anti-aircraft missile systems brought in before the shootdown were then quickly rushed back across the border into Russia after the incident. The Ukrainian Prime Minister calls it a crime against humanity. Meanwhile, President Obama is being criticized for not being forceful enough.
President Obama is trying to be deliberative. It comes off as indecisive. He's trying to be thoughtful. It comes off as weakness. The Europeans are never going to lead on this issue. It is indispensable that America lead.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Secretary of State John Kerry is back in the Middle East today, pushing for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And he's sounding a warning to Hamas as he joins diplomatic efforts to resume a truce that had been agreed to in November 2012.
Hamas has to understand you can't just sit there and claim a moral rectitude or the higher ground while you're busy rocketing people and capturing people and digging tunnels to attack them. And this has to stop.
Meanwhile, the UN Security Council met for an emergency session late Sunday, seeking a solution to the crisis.
Sunday was the bloodiest day yet in the fighting between Hamas and Israel. 13 IDF soldiers died in combat and at least 10 terrorists were killed trying to cross into Israel through a vast network of tunnels. Also, more than 100 Palestinians died in an assault on a Hamas terrorist stronghold in Gaza. CBN News' Chris Mitchell has more from the Israel-Gaza border.
The IDF released this chilling footage of the Hamas terrorists who infiltrated Israel. Israeli soldiers stopped the infiltration, but it's this kind of Hamas operation that presents a clear and present danger to Israelis along the border with Gaza. The tunnels are designed to infiltrate Israeli communities like this one close to the border. Gaza is just about a mile that direction, and some of these tunnels are more than a mile long, 60 feet deep with multiple exits. It proves that Hamas has been planning this for a very long time.
And I can't imagine anything more terrifying for the people who live there than the thought that suddenly the earth opens up, almost like a scene out of a grade B zombie movie. And the walking dead come out, except they're not dead, they're not walking, and they're armed with machine guns, anti-tank missiles, grenades, and a few thousand rounds of ammunition. That's why we had to do the ground operation. There was absolutely no choice. What country in the world would allow its people to be under that kind of danger?
The first goal of Israel's ground campaign is to discover and destroy this elaborate maze of tunnels. This is footage of IDF soldiers discovering a tunnel inside a home and destroying the tunnel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Israelis to expect an extended campaign to eliminate Hamas rocket fire from Gaza and these tunnels. In one attack against Hamas, more than 100 Palestinians, both civilians and terrorists, died in Sajia, a Hamas stronghold. For 3 days, Israel warned residents by phone calls and leaflets to get out of harm's way, while the Hamas interior minister told civilians to stay.
Hamas is effectively conducting self-genocide. They're placing their women and children around missile launchers, shooting missiles and rockets at Israel, waiting for us to retaliate in order for them to kill their own women and children, and that's what's happening.
Former U.S. President Bill Clinton said using civilians is part of Hamas's strategy.
They have a strategy designed to force Israel to kill their own civilians so that the rest of the world will condemn them.
While diplomatic efforts continue to try to arrange a ceasefire, Israel called up more troops in its effort to eliminate the threat posed by Hamas to the Jewish state. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, on the Israeli-Gaza border.
Israel is fighting this battle to end the terrorist rockets that rain down on Israeli civilians. Those deadly attacks strike throughout the Jewish state, even threatening some of the same hospitals where Palestinian doctors are being trained and Palestinian patients are being treated. George Thomas visited one of those hospitals to bring us this report.
Dr. Ron Lobel has worked at Barzilai Hospital for 34 years. But as deputy director of the hospital, he still cannot get used to the sound of the siren, warning of incoming rockets, which sends everyone scrambling to shelter.
We've been living with this situation of rockets exploding above the hospital, and some of them were exploding within the premises of the hospital.
Barzilai is just 7 miles from Gaza and within easy reach of Hamas's rockets.
It means that our staff driving back and forth, coming for their shifts, are under threat.
Barzilai is also one of the main hospitals treating injured Israeli soldiers coming off the battlefield. CBN News was there when medics brought in a soldier severely injured during a firefight with Hamas.
Under normal conditions, when I mean normal, when the war is not going on, this room would be sealed off. There would be no use of it. But today, it's a hive of activity because it houses some of the most vulnerable patients here in the city.
Dr. Lobel gave CBN News a tour of the hospital, including the underground bunker turned neonatal ward that's caring for premature babies.
This is the most sheltered area in the hospital, the real sheltered area in the hospital. And these are the babies that might suffer most from moving urgently from one place to another.
Barzilai also treats Palestinian patients from the West Bank. In fact, before the recent conflict erupted, patients from Gaza routinely visited the hospital. But Hamas has stopped that for now. Lobel has spent many years in Gaza training Palestinian doctors and nurses. Many of them have worked at Barzilai alongside their Israeli counterparts.
You can see lying side by side a patient from Gaza and a patient from Sderot or from Ashkelon being injured by a Palestinian rocket. And they lie side by side and they are being treated by Israeli doctors and by Palestinian trainees. We always say that we have a box at the entrance where we leave our politics outside, and here whoever knocks on our door is being treated.
Lobel says the hospital is a symbol of what he hopes will someday bring lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. George Thomas, CBN News, Ashkelon, Israel.
Jihadists from the Islamic State in Iraq have forced Christians in Mosul to flee the city. The militants told Christians they can convert to Islam, pay a protection tax, or face death. Most Christians fled to the nearby self-ruled Kurdish region or other areas protected by Kurdish security forces. Residents in Mosul say militants are occupying churches and seizing the homes of Christians who have fled the city. Mosul's Christian community goes back nearly 2,000 years. Before the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, some 100,000 Christians lived there. Today, it's believed there are fewer than 200, and there may be none at all.
A Christian woman who escaped imprisonment and death in Sudan now faces more obstacles. Members of Miriam Ibrahim's family are suing to have her marriage annulled in an attempt to keep her in the country. She and her family are stuck in the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum. She had been sentenced to death for marrying a Christian and abandoning the Muslim faith. A judge dropped that sentence after an international outcry, but she's been unable to leave the country.
Americans view Jews, Catholics, and evangelicals favorably while having negative views towards atheists and Muslims. That is according to a new Wall Street Journal and Pew Research survey. Most Catholics and evangelicals rated atheists lower than Muslims, and Jews and atheists rated evangelical Christians lower than Muslims. People over the age of 65 rated Jews and evangelicals highest, and Muslims and atheists lowest, while people age 18 to 29 rated Jews and Catholics highest and Mormons lowest.
President Obama is signing executive orders today creating special protections for gay and transgender employees. The move prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity by the federal government and federal contractors. A pre-existing exemption will reportedly remain in place. That exemption was created by President George W. Bush. It allows religious contractors to employ only fellow believers, but it's not clear if that exemption will apply to sexual orientation.
Coming up from the land of the Indianapolis 500, another race is on, the race to save teens who are living on the streets. The story after this. Disadvantaged teenagers who attend top schools might not only get an academic boost, but their health could benefit as well. That is according to a new study from the Journal of Pediatrics. The study followed 1,000 low-income high school students in Los Angeles, some of which were accepted to top charter schools through a lottery, and others who went elsewhere. 36% of the selected kids engaged in at least one risky behavior, compared with 42% of the other teens who went to worse-off schools.
Where does dignity come from, and how do you restore it when it's gone? The answer to those questions is the key to rescuing 2 million homeless American teens. One ministry discovered it's simpler than you might think. David Brody brings us this uplifting story from Indianapolis.
From the crossroads of America, Eric Howard found himself at a crossroad with God.
God just captured my heart in this hotel room. And I can tell you what I was wearing, the length of my hair, the steam on the mirror, the color of the carpet, the tree outside, the bedspread. And from that point on, my life just took a very different direction of what I thought was success and what is success were two different things.
That moment put Howard on a journey to serve a group many don't even know exist. When you think of Indianapolis, you of course think of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Indy 500. And while they do a lot of racing here, the folks at Outreach Incorporated are doing a different sort of race. They're racing against time to save homeless teenagers.
So from that point, bottles of water, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and blankets in the trunk of a car, it's blossomed to where we are now.
And where is that exactly? A full-blown ministry helping teenagers living on the streets of Indy. Howard's Outreach, Inc. provides basic and often overlooked necessities. Necessities that Howard says he didn't even consider until a run-in with a frustrated teenager changed his thinking.
Hey, I've been doing ministry with the homeless for, 12 years, 14 years. Please tell me what I don't understand. And he goes, I can go out and get a job. And of course, my flesh just said, then why don't you? Probably wasn't the best answer I could have said at that moment. He goes, what you don't understand is I can smell myself. Do you really want me serving up your shake and fries? And it has dawned on me. So it's a question of dignity.
Through the help of donations, Outreach added laundry facilities, showers, job interview courses, outdoor adventures, graduation assistance, and yes, the little things that teens look forward to, like driving lessons, all in an attempt to provide a sense of normalcy and a place to call home.
So you walk into a living room, which you're received well, just like you're walking into our house, whatever, you're bringing it to a guest.
Outreach also incorporated a street initiative team that ventures to parts of the city where others fear to tread. Often at night, they spend hours looking under bridges and overpasses to help those in need. One specific offer appealed to 24-year-old Tiffany Pettiford.
What I found at Outreach is what I was looking for, literally for my whole teenage life to become an adult. It's just love. This is a safe place that you can come and feel love, and they have the love of God there, which is really important.
Homeless since the age of 21, life started out rough for Tiffany.
As a young child, I went to 12 different elementary schools. I went to 3 different middle schools and 2 different high schools. So never really had any stability.
Then changes at home forced her into a life on the streets.
I could very well be dead if I didn't turn my life to Christ. Situations like I can remember times where I'll be walking the streets at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning in areas I probably shouldn't even be in. Anything could have happened.
And something did happen. Tiffany found God's love on the steps of outreach.
The first day I went there, I walked to the car 3 times before I actually went into the building. I'm like, I don't know if I should do this, da-da-da. I was very hesitant.
She found her physical needs met as well as her spiritual needs.
I literally came there broken, you know, from my mind frame or how I looked at life and emotionally and physically, and it really changed me into the woman that I am today.
Now that woman is a thriving 24-year-old college student with a great job and a new home. She's happy to show off her new life and give credit to God's love and the help of outreach. She also rediscovered a lost relationship.
My brother and someone who he calls his older brother, they were online looking for him. And at the same time that they were looking for him, our dad was looking for us. Me and my dad's relationship it's actually really good. I'm the youngest, so I kind of get spoiled a little bit.
Proving that when God writes the story, miracles can even come from the trunk of a car. David Brody, CBN News, from Indianapolis.
Up next, churches at risk. Find out what congregations need to do to protect themselves on Sunday mornings. You don't go to church thinking you could be the victim of a violent attack, but it happens more often than you might think.
And our Mark Martin talked with a man who is both a police officer and an ordained minister. He travels the country showing churches how to keep their congregations safe.
This is 911. This is Sue. Where's your emergency? There's a shooting at New Life Church.
One of the most publicized acts of violence at a church happened in Colorado Springs in 2007. 24-year-old Matthew Murray opened fire in the parking lot of New Life Church after the 11 a.m. service. Murray struggled with mental disorders and became angry at Christians and bitter after being denied a chance to go on a missions trip. He took the lives of teenage sisters Stephanie and Rachel Works and injured their father and 2 other parishioners before encountering a church member inside the building who was a volunteer security guard. Saying God guided her and protected her, Jean Assam heroically faced the heavily armed Murray and shot him with her personal concealed weapon. He then took his own life. Incidents like this have church security expert Jimmy Meeks sounding the alarm.
We're up to at least 473 confirmed violent deaths on church and faith-based property since 1999. And that number is equal to or maybe slightly ahead of the number of violent deaths that occur at schools that we hear about what seems like weekly.
An ordained minister since 1973 and a police officer for more than 33 years, Meeks wants churches and faith-based organizations to become aware of the violence and learn how to protect their congregations. He crisscrosses the country, helping lead what are called sheepdog seminars for churches. Meeks says there are 3 types of people: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. Simply put, sheepdogs protect the flock from wolves.
The main thing we tell churches, Mark, is that it's easy to know what to do if you can get beyond being blind about what's happening. 2013, we had a death in a church and faith-based property every 8 days, and every 2.5 days, a violent incident occurring on church and faith-based property.
Well, what is the most common type of violence in a church?
The most common one we see is probably domestic violence. A man is mad at his wife. A church in Louisiana a couple of years ago, he simply went to the church, he pulled her out in the parking lot and shot her dead. We see that a lot. These guys get angry and they just don't care where their wife is. So churches need to be aware if you're having domestic violence in your church, and you do have it somewhere. You know, church people do good at covering things up sometimes. You need to be aware of these things, and you just need to be ready. You need to be prepared.
The sheepdog seminars for churches are designed to help congregations and faith-based groups be prepared. Meeks and other experts appeal to churches to form what are called eyes and ears teams. The teams are made up of men and women whose assignment on a given day is to watch out for anyone and anything that would try to harm a congregation. Seminar leaders also advocate the use of spiritual weapons like fasting and prayer. They say the idea of protecting churchgoers is biblical, citing, among other scriptures, Nehemiah 4:9, which says, "We prayed to our God and posted a guard." Mark Martin, CBN News.
Finally today, America has experienced at least 2 great awakenings in its spiritual history, but in a time when another is so greatly needed, what can spark it?
As Paul Strand reports, many Christians are hoping a massive spiritual assault that's been launched on Washington, D.C. will be that spark.
Christians by the thousands have poured into the nation's capital for Celebrate America. Nighttime meetings have concentrated on the country's rich spiritual heritage and preserving it. By day, hundreds have fanned out across the city to witness. Pastor Eric Gagnon says it all began with prayer for America nationwide.
We started a 24/7 prayer chain probably at the beginning of the year.
That was like artillery fire softening up the ground for the hundreds of street evangelists Gagnon's been training.
Dear Lord Jesus,
come into my heart.
Everyone agrees these are troubled times and the nation needs prayer. But to see national revival, we need to see it one by one in the lives of the people of the nation. And that takes getting out here among them and letting them know face to face there's a God that loves them.
We believe in prayer, but you got to get up and you got to go share the good news.
CBN News followed bilingual street evangelist Troy Bravenbore onto the National Mall as he approached dozens of people.
Has anyone told you guys recently that God loves you guys and He's got an awesome plan for y'all's life? También, sabes que Dios te ama y tiene un plan maravilloso para su vida?
By the end of the day, Troy and his team had led some 500 people to praying for salvation.
Come into my heart. Forgive me of my sin.
And we've seen over 23,000 people pray the prayer of salvation.
Celebrate America's D.C. July events are meant just to be a spark.
Once somebody wins souls, because most don't, their heart is broken for the lost. So when Celebrate America's over, it isn't about, oh, that crusade's over. They continue to win souls in their realm of influence. We're believing God for another great spiritual awakening in America. We're believing that the church will wake up.
Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the National Mall.
Amen. Prayer and evangelism. That's what it's all about.
Called to do.
Amen. Well, that's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
Tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you join us again right here next time. Make it a marvelous Monday, everybody.